Your phone is face down on the table. You are mid-conversation, mid-meal, mid-thought. Then a badge appears on an icon, or a buzz moves through your pocket, and everything stops. You did not decide to stop. Your hand was already moving before the conscious part of your brain registered what happened. That reflex is not an accident. That reflex was built. It was studied, measured, iterated, and optimized by teams of engineers and behavioral scientists working inside the largest application platforms on Earth. The goal was not to inform you. The goal was to interrupt you in the precise way most likely to make you unlock the device and open an app. The difference matters enormously. This video is about how that happened. It is not about technology being bad. It is about a specific engineering decision made at a specific moment in time by people who understood exactly what they were doing and why the financial structure of the app industry made that decision almost inevitable. There is a mechanism here. There is a money trail. And there are names. To understand what notifications became, you have to understand what they were at the beginning. In the early years of personal computing, a notification was a status message. It sat in a corner of your screen and told you something had happened when you were ready to look. It was passive. It waited for you. You were the one who decided when to look. When smartphones arrived, this model came with them. The first iPhone shipped with a notification system that was, by modern standards, almost polite. Alerts appeared. You could ignore them entirely. The device did not vibrate, did not flash, did not emit escalating sounds designed to produce urgency. It was a channel for information, not a mechanism for compulsion. The shift happened for a reason that had nothing to do with improving user experience. It happened because of a metric. Around the end of the first decade of the 2000s, advertising platforms and app store ecosystems converged on one number above all others as the signal of an app's health and value. That number was daily active users. Daily active users, almost always abbreviated in internal documents and investor presentations to 3 letters, became the currency that determined whether an app lived or died. Advertisers paid more per impression on apps with high daily engagement. Venture capital flowed toward apps that could demonstrate daily return visits. App Store rankings rewarded it. Every incentive pointed at the same target. The problem was that most apps, most of the time, do not generate content interesting enough to make someone want to open them every single day. A calendar app has nothing new to show you on most mornings. A photo editing tool sits idle for weeks. A retail app is irrelevant until you need to buy something. Natural usage patterns for most apps cluster around occasional, purposeful sessions. So developers faced a choice. They could accept that their app was genuinely useful only sometimes and build a product that served that honest pattern. Or they could manufacture reasons for the user to open the app every day, regardless of whether there was anything meaningful waiting for them. The financial incentive structure made the second option far more rewarding. This is where notification engineering entered the picture in a new form. If you could send a user an alert at the right moment in the right way, with the right sensation of urgency, you could manufacture a daily open that had nothing to do with whether there was anything worth seeing inside the app. The alert itself became the product. The content was almost irrelevant. Researchers working inside and adjacent to major platforms began documenting something that, once you see it, is very hard to unsee. Intermittent variable reward, a concept borrowed directly from mid-century behavioral psychology, is the single most powerful driver of compulsive checking behavior. The mechanism is simple. When a reward arrives on an unpredictable schedule, the brain does not habituate. It stays alert. It keeps checking. This is the same mechanism that makes certain gambling behaviors so persistent. The payout is not guaranteed. That uncertainty, that maybe, is precisely what keeps the behavior going. Notification systems were redesigned around this insight. If every notification contained something genuinely valuable, users would engage with it calmly and move on. But if the value was unpredictable, if sometimes it mattered and sometimes it did not, users would check faster and more often. This is why social media platforms, which mastered this model earlier than anyone else, began flooding users with notifications that were technically accurate but deliberately unimportant. Someone liked a photo you posted 3 weeks ago. Someone you barely know joined the platform. A post you were not tagged in is getting attention in a group you joined once and forgot. These alerts carry no real signal. They exist to trigger the checking reflex. The people building these systems knew this. This is not a retrospective interpretation. Internal documents and testimony from former employees of several major platforms have confirmed that engagement teams explicitly tested which notification types produced the fastest return opens. Low-value social nudges consistently outperformed high-value informational alerts because low-value nudges created more anxiety and therefore more urgency to resolve that anxiety by opening the app. Anxiety is the operative word here. The checking reflex is not fundamentally about curiosity or pleasure. Neuroscience research has established that the alert sound or vibration itself triggers a mild stress response before the user even knows what the notification contains. The body reads the alert as a signal that something may require attention, which is the same ancient threat detection system that made our ancestors scan the tree line. Platforms are hijacking threat detection to sell advertising. Now follow the money. An app with high daily active user numbers commands a premium from advertisers buying impressions inside that app. When a platform sells advertising inventory, the price per 1,000 impressions scales with how engaged and how frequently returning the audience is. A user who opens an app 12 times a day is worth more to an advertiser than a user who opens it twice a week, even if both users see the same total number of ads. This means every manufactured interruption that produces a re-engagement event is directly monetizable. The notification is not a service. It is an invoice sent to your attention. The app developer collects a fraction of a cent in additional advertising revenue every time the anxiety loop is successfully triggered and you open the app. Across hundreds of millions of users, those fractions of cents become the backbone of multi-billion-dollar revenue models. The operating systems that host these apps have their own role in this architecture. Apple and Google both take a percentage of revenue generated through their app stores. Both companies also sell advertising products that target users based on behavioral data, including engagement patterns. An ecosystem where users open apps more frequently is an ecosystem that generates more data, more ad inventory, and more commission revenue for the platform layer itself. Neither Apple nor Google has a structural incentive to aggressively limit notification volume. Both companies have introduced notification management features over the years. Both have added summary modes, focus modes, and permission prompts. These features exist and some of them are genuinely useful. But they are opt-in. They are buried in settings and they do not remove the ability of developers to send the alerts that drive engagement in the first place. The architecture of permission flows toward more notifications, not fewer. Consider how notification permissions work in practice. When you install an app, it asks for permission to send you notifications. The request appears immediately at the moment of highest motivation, just after you have decided you want this app. The interface presents the choice as a binary: allow or do not allow. Declining feels like handicapping the experience you just chose to have. Studies on permission prompt design have found that the timing and framing of these prompts dramatically skew toward acceptance. Once permission is granted, the developer controls the volume, the timing, and the content of every alert. There is no standard. There is no regulator telling a retail app how many times per week it may interrupt you with a manufactured urgency message about a sale that is, invariably, always happening. The developer's interest is in more opens. The user's interest is in fewer interruptions. The permission system resolves this conflict entirely in the developer's favor. The badge is worth examining on its own. The small red circle with a number inside it, sitting on an app icon, was introduced as a way to tell users that unread items were waiting. It communicated a count. It was informational. What it became was something different. Research on badge psychology has found that unresolved badges produce a mild but persistent cognitive load, a background sense that something is unfinished, that pulls attention back to the device throughout the day. App developers learned to inflate badge counts deliberately. An app might show a badge of 47, not because 47 distinct things require your attention, but because it bundled together every marginal social interaction, system update suggestion, and promotional message it could find into a single escalating number. The number is not meaningful. It is designed to feel urgent. Resolving it requires opening the app and seeing ads. Sound design is another engineered layer. The default notification sounds on most platforms were chosen and refined specifically for their interruptive quality. A notification sound works best, from a developer's perspective, when it is impossible to process as background noise. It needs to cross the threshold of conscious attention, even when you are focused on something else. The standard two-tone chime or the soft buzz is not a neutral design choice. It is the result of testing for maximum attentional capture. Haptic feedback added another dimension. When devices began vibrating on notification, the physical sensation bypassed the auditory system entirely. A vibration against the body produces a startle-adjacent response that is even harder to consciously filter than a sound. It activates through clothing, through furniture, through sleep. The phantom vibration phenomenon, where people feel a vibration that did not happen, is a well-documented consequence of habituating to this constant low-level physical alert state. The lock screen became a contested surface in this same period. Showing notification previews on the lock screen means that personal messages, social alerts, and manufactured promotional nudges are all visible without unlocking the device. Developers lobbied hard for lock screen access because a notification glimpsed on a lock screen produces an open rate far higher than one that requires unlocking first. The user never consented to making their lock screen a billboard. The default settings consented for them. The most revealing case study in this history is what happened when platforms began experimenting with reducing notification volume. Several social platforms have run internal tests where they significantly reduce the volume of low-value notification types sent to a subset of users. The results were consistent. Time spent per session often increased, because users were less frantic and more genuinely engaged when they did open the app. But daily open rates dropped. Daily open rates are what advertisers pay for. Session quality, meaning how thoughtfully or satisfyingly a user engaged, is not the primary metric that drives advertising revenue in a system built around impression volume. So platforms faced a direct conflict. Reduce notifications, and users are happier but less financially valuable. Or maintain notification volume, and users are more agitated but more monetizable. The financial structure answered the question before it was even fully asked. The counter-argument that surfaces most often is that users choose this. They installed the apps, they accepted the permissions, they can turn off notifications at any time. This argument is worth taking seriously before dismantling it because it contains a grain of truth. Users do have nominal control. The settings exist. Some people do find and use them. But the argument fails for a structural reason. Informed consent requires that the person consenting understands what they are agreeing to. When someone downloads a weather app and accepts notification permissions, they are not agreeing to receive 17 promotional alerts per week, timed to moments when behavioral data suggests they are bored or anxious. The permission prompt does not describe what the permission will actually be used for. The consent is manufactured just as surely as the engagement. The second counterargument is that notifications provide genuine value sometimes. This is also true. A navigation alert that tells you about a traffic obstruction ahead serves you directly. A message from a person you care about serves you directly. A calendar reminder for a meeting in 30 minutes serves you directly. These notifications are the descendants of the original model, the passive status tool waiting for your attention. The problem is that genuine utility and manufactured compulsion now arrive through the same channel, in the same format, with the same sensory profile. Your phone cannot tell you which buzz matters and which one is a retail app trying to hit its monthly active user numbers. You have to check every time to find out. That is not a design limitation. That is a design choice that benefits every app trying to inflate its engagement metrics. The cost of this system is not abstract. Cognitive research on interruption has established that recovering full concentration after an interruption takes meaningfully longer than the interruption itself. A single notification that takes 3 seconds to glance at and dismiss can derail a complex cognitive task for a span of time measured in minutes, not seconds. For someone doing work requiring sustained focus, a day of frequent notifications is not annoying background noise. It is structural damage to their capacity to think. Children and adolescents are a specific population worth naming. Young people are growing up in an environment where notification-driven anxiety is the default state of device ownership. The developing brain's capacity for sustained attention, for tolerating the productive discomfort of boredom, for building the internal regulation systems that allow deep focus, is being conditioned in an environment specifically engineered to prevent all three. The industry that profits from this faces no regulatory requirement to study or disclose the developmental consequences. Sleep is another casualty with a direct financial beneficiary. When notifications arrive overnight, as they do by default on most devices, they fragment sleep architecture in ways that accumulate into chronic sleep deficit. The user whose sleep is fractured by 2 a.m. notifications is a user who wakes up with a cognitive profile: lower impulse control, shorter attention span, higher susceptibility to emotional triggers that makes them more vulnerable to the very engagement mechanisms the apps use during the day. The system is self-reinforcing. Productivity loss has measurable economic dimensions that fall entirely on the user, not the platform. Someone whose working day is punctuated by dozens of manufactured interruptions produces less, makes more errors, and experiences higher baseline stress. None of that cost appears anywhere in the quarterly earnings report of the company that sent the notification. It is externalized completely onto the person whose attention was extracted. The relationship dimension deserves its own moment. A 2 a.m. text from someone you love is different from a 2 a.m. promotional alert from a food delivery app. But they arrive identically. The checking reflex triggered by genuine connection and the checking reflex triggered by manufactured urgency are behaviorally indistinguishable in the moment. Platforms have not merely exploited an existing reflex, they have contaminated the channel through which human connection arrives, making it unreliable as a signal. Legislation has moved slowly and unevenly on this. Some jurisdictions have considered or implemented requirements around default notification settings for apps targeting children. France has passed measures around smartphone use in schools that acknowledge the interruption problem without directly regulating notification design. No major economy has yet established binding standards for what constitutes acceptable notification frequency or required genuinely informed consent for notification permissions. The industry has successfully framed this as a user experience preference, not a public health question. Former employees of major platforms who have spoken publicly about notification design describe an internal culture where user well-being was a stated value and a peripheral concern. The metrics that determined whether a product team was succeeding were engagement metrics. A team that shipped a feature reducing daily active user counts by even a fraction of a percentage point would face internal pressure regardless of whether the users themselves reported higher satisfaction. Satisfaction is not a primary metric. Opens are. This is the structural answer to the question of why well-intentioned engineers working at companies that publicly committed to user well-being built systems that produce these outcomes. They were not malicious. They were responding to the incentive structure they worked inside. The metric was daily active users. Notifications drove daily active users. Therefore, notifications were optimized. The harm was a predictable output of a financial architecture, not an aberration. There is a final irony buried in this system that is worth naming plainly. The more successfully a platform manufactures notification anxiety, the less the user trusts any individual notification to be important. Habituated anxiety becomes notification blindness. Users begin ignoring all alerts from apps whose credibility they have exhausted. Platforms respond by escalating the interruptive intensity of remaining alerts to break through the blindness. The system requires escalation to sustain itself. The reflex you felt at the beginning of this video, the hand reaching for the device before the thought formed, is the output of an engineering project. It was designed by behavioral scientists, built by product teams, optimized through millions of A/B tests, and deployed in the service of a financial model that pays per daily open. The tool that was supposed to keep you informed became the mechanism that keeps you captive. The next time your hand moves toward your phone before you have consciously chosen to pick it up, you are watching the product in action, not you reaching for information. A trigger being pulled by a system that earns money every time it fires. The anxiety is not incidental, it is the point. The interruption is not a side effect, it is the business model, and now you can see the strings.